Okay, when it's time to braid, you're looking for strands that hold their shape. If they're too wet, and this will just get squishy. And if they're too dry, they won't want to bend. You pull and then cross. Pull and then cross. If you pull down, it'll stretch the V's downward. So I pull out to the side and cross and then snug them up to keep it tight. To start your braids, you've got 2 on one side, 2 on the other, and then the middle. I like the 2 that end up on top to be pointing backwards. So on the right side of the fork, that means 2 over the middle, then the 2 on the right over the middle, and then we begin braiding the 5-strand braid. Try to keep the grain side up. You don't want your strands twisting over. And if your hide is too wet and things get squishy, just be patient. Stop and wait and come back when your strands are drier. I'll really start pulling on my strands after I've braided about an inch or so. You pull on your strand before you cross it, and it tightens up above. Pull on my strand, then cross it. If you're doing it right and your strands are the right temper, then it's going to make your hands hurt. No doubt about it. All that soap I put on yesterday before I bagged my braids is helping each strand glide on top of the others. And you braid all the way down until you get 5 or 6 inches below the bottom of the bar. The braids go down to about 5 inches below the tree. I took each one of them, and on the back side I thinned them down and cut each tip of the strand to a taper. Did this on both sides. And now I'm going to bring my ring up, and my goal is to get it to set below the tree. I'll run the braids through it, bend them back, and see the arch shape that this braid creates. I'm going to have to be careful that I set my braids to follow that arch and not just in a straight line. So I try to get these braids to kind of follow an arc. It's okay to pull on the ring a little bit because there might be slack in some of these. Starting with the middle braid, I pull my strands from this braid through, and whichever one is the lowest, it appears to be on this side, that's the first one I'm going to work with. It's going to create a V going this way. One after the other, we'll open the braid with an awl and splice these strings through. I'll be working this strand first, and I wanted to have a V-shaped arc, so I just count up a couple of strands and make my first hole with the awl. So this strand will go into that hole, and then I'll set my awl just above it at the next spot, and the strand on the right will come across onto it. You end up getting this effect. And when you turn the braid to the side, you want your tails to go inside. So there's 2 on this side, which means 2 tails come out on the left side, and there's 3 on this side, which means 3 tails come out on the right side, and you leave everything a little bit loose, and then when we put this on the jack and tighten everything down, we'll take our pliers and pull all these strands and tighten that up. This is where we finish off. I've got the car jack under the fork, and through the brass rings I just have a wooden dowel. I've applied some tension on these strands to dry, but I don't want to damage the tree. They don't need too much tension. They've been drying for a day or two now, and as you can see, I've begun to trim the tails of my strands. I'm just trimming them off to like 3/4 of an inch, and then I'll tuck them in the little gap of the braids. Every 6 months while your rawhide is fresh, you're going to want to apply a little bit of kerosene to a rag and rub it in everywhere. And if you're wondering where all the hair went, I got most of that off with steel wool or a little brass bristle wheel on a Dremel tool. This braid was already here. It goes around behind the cantle, and since it wasn't broken, the owner of this saddle asked me not to replace it. But if you're building a new saddle, you're going to need to tie a rope in that position. You want your braids to follow the angle of the fork, which is usually a 7/8 to 3/4 rigging position. So don't forget to tie a rope from the ring on one side behind the cantle to the ring on the other side when you set your jack, and that way the braids will dry under the right amount of tension in the correct direction. Thanks for watching. Aloha.